when we take our Bibles, when we take our Torah, when we take our Tanakh, did I hit record on the audio? Yes, I did. Just making sure. When we take our Tanakh, we find in our text our favorite stories. We find in our text official and popular histories. We find in the Torah poems, prayers. We find laws. What we read is an accumulated history over the ages. It's a place where we can eavesdrop on ancient Israelite political and religious debates. Debates such as which God they should worship and where should they worship. How they should respond to foreign enemies that are much more powerful than they are. Whether they should be ruled by a king or whether their deity, Yud-He-Vav-He, is their only legitimate ruler. We find these things in the text when we eavesdrop, and we eavesdrop properly, intentionally. We hear all these things. We see all these things. Now, while the text, the Torah, the Tanakh, the Bible is an archive of historical materials, it is not objective or comprehensive. This is an extremely important statement. The text tells us about history. It tells us about the ancient Israelites. It tells us about their neighbors. But we would be mistaken if we think that this historical data that we find in our text is objective. It is not. Or comprehensive. It's really not. The Bible is not an ethnography. We wish it was, but it's not. What we have is a preserved stories, that is particular one, carefully chosen stories, laws, history, that some, not all, that some ancient Israelites considered valuable to pass down to the next generation. That is what we find ourselves reading. All these points are extremely, extremely, extremely important. I'm going to read a text that is very familiar to all of us. I hope it is. After I read the text, I'm going to pose a question and see what you come up with. So it's a test, actually. The text I'm going to read is a test. 1 Kings 17. And the word of Yud-He-Vav-He came to him. Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have designated a widow there to feed you. Okay, so you pay very close attention to everything that I'm reading. You know the story, but don't read the story in your head. Read the story on the page or on the screen, and maybe if you're just hearing me, Just listen to the words that I'm saying. I'll start again. And the words of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh came to him. Go at once to Zarephath of Zidon and stay there. I have designated a widow there to feed you. So he went at once to Zarephath. When he came to the entrance of the town, a widow was there gathering wood. He called out to her, please bring me a little water in your pitcher and let me drink. As she went to fetch it, he called out to her, please bring along a piece of bread for me. As Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim lives, she replied, I have nothing baked, nothing but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I have just gathered a couple of sticks so that I can go home and prepare it for me and my son. We shall eat it, and then we shall die. Don't be afraid, said Elijah to her. Go and do as you have said. But first, make me a small cake from what you have there, and bring it out to me. Then make some for yourself and your son. For that says Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Elohim of Israel, the jar of flour shall not give out, and the jug of oil shall not fail until the day that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh sent rain upon the ground. She went and did as Elijah had spoken, and she and he and her son and her household had food for a long time. The jar of flour did not give out, nor did the jug of oil fail, just as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had spoken through Elijah. After a while, the son of the mistress of the house fell sick, and his illness grew worse until he had no breath left in him. She said to Elijah, what harm have I done you, O man of Elohim, that you should come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son? Give me the boy, he said to her. And taking him from his arms, he carried him to the upper chamber, where he was staying, and laid him down on his own bed. He cried out to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and said, O Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, my Elohim, will you bring calamity upon this widow, whose guest I am, and let her son die? Then he stretched out over the child 3 times and cried out to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, saying, O Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, my Elohim, let this child's life return to his body. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh heard Elijah's plea. The child's life returned to his body, and he revived. Elijah picked up the child and brought him down from the upper room into the main room and gave him to his mother. See, said Elijah, your son is alive. And the woman answered Elijah, now I know that you are a man of Elohim, and that the word of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is truly in your mouth. Beautiful story, famous story, I hope. Now my question, with what I have just read, what do you pick out from the narrative? What stood out to you? What is the narrative about?
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom, Mr. David. Do I need a pen? Okay.
What I see is that they're trying. Well, whoever reads this story will sit back and say, "Okay, my God is great. Look at all He did. He fed 3 people for a very long time.
Yes.
He raised the dead.
Yes.
And He he kept his promise he made to Elijah. That's really the general lesson that I would get from it. Like, why wouldn't I listen to this God? Why wouldn't I follow him? Look what he's all capable of. But deeper into it, or not deeper into it, but I noticed that the lady said that she's guilty of something, but they never actually went into it. That was just a sidebar note, though.
Correct. I think when their son died, versus when she said, "You came to remind me of my sin," I think.
Yeah, you came to bring my sin upon me, or something towards that. But that was just a sidebar note. But in general, though, I just think that it's just to exemplify how great God is, or how great Yud-Heh Vav-Heh is. This story is designed for, because within the pages or within those verses, he performed like 3 different miracles.
Correct. Nice.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I also think he blessed her because of the relationship that he had with the prophet also.
Okay. Beautiful.
Rabbi.
Mr. Chris. No, Mr. Vincent.
Rabbi.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Vincent.
Also, along with all that stuff, is to I see to trust in the word of the prophets or the men of the Lord.
Awesome. Tracks in the word. Nice.
Rabbi, I have a question for you.
Yes.
This widow here, was this the widow whose husband was a I believe he was a prophet beforehand, but died and left them poor? Is this that same widow?
No, that one was the one that was told to. That one is Elisha.
Okay, all right.
Elisha, when she said you should close the door behind you. Yes, I think it was Elisha. Not the same one. No, not the same one.
Rabbi?
Yes, Mr. Chris. Good to hear.
Shabbat Shalom.
You. Shabbat Shalom.
Long time listener, first time caller. So I noticed that Yah's name is mentioned 10 or 11 times in these few verses. So there is an attempt to, I guess, by the Deuteronomist or the final editors, to really make sure that you know that this is Yahweh and not another God.
Correct. Beautiful pickup. Nice.
Brother Basil, I think for me, what stood out was this upper chamber and upper room. I don't know, what was the buildings like, and what does that really mean?
Hold that thought. Hold that thought, Madam Cynthia.
Yeah.
Thought.
Rabbi, to piggyback off what Cynthia said as well, looking at the structure of ancient Israelite homes, right?
Yes. Okay. You need to hold that thought.
Okay.
Let me come in and then I'll come back to you. So the answers that I've gotten so far, beautiful answers, valid answers. So what we see is the narrator, the final editor, as Mr. Chris said, is pushing us, advising us, showing us that we should worship the one true God, the one who can work miracles and sustain life. So the text or the narrative is 7 theological purposes. Beautiful. If you focus on the theological purposes, you miss a lot of data that is extremely important. Now, Madam Cynthia, you can come in, and then Mr. Jason will come in.
Oh, do you want to say more, Brother Basil?
You can have more to say.
I don't think I can say any more. I think that's just what stood out to me. I'll wait and sit on it. I'll let Brother Jason go in there.
Okay.
Jason, what do you think?
I'm here. Go ahead, Madam Joy.
Yes, Madam Alita, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, Madam Alita.
If this was if this was modern day, this chapter would be a commercial for Yuhei Bahe. Now, you know how a commercial only is propaganda. It only promotes what they want you to see about the product. And they want you to see these great things about the product and how well the product works and what all it does. You know, Wonder Bread helps build bodies in 12 ways. It tells you all about the product. In case you didn't know, he does this. In case you didn't know, he does that. Right. So I see this chapter 17, these verses we just read, as a Yuhei Bahe commercial. Whoever, like you said, the editors of this or the final editors of this decided they would throw in a commercial and make everybody see not only who the man, the prophet was, but more than that, to see who the true Yuhei Bahe was. And so if this was 2021, this would be a commercial, and it would be a commercial that would run on the TV all day long, just to get people to know or introduce them to a new product.
Awesome. Beautifully said. I have a product, but I'm a leader. I have to reach out to you for
okay.
commercial.
All right. Okay.
All right. You notice that we are programmed to read the bigger things. We are programmed to read the miracles, the supernatural elements of the text or the narrative. But with this brief narrative that I have read, in the midst of all these miracles, in the midst of all these bigger pictures, the story accidentally relates several details about the everyday life of a poor widow. With just this small narrative, I get so much detail that the author is giving me without giving me. The author is writing to serve theological purposes, but accidentally, he gives me so much historical data. When we eavesdrop on a text, it's good to look at the text from the theological perspective, but never forget to also step back and eavesdrop and see what accidental data that is being given outside of the theological realm. What do we see about this woman? What do we see about the everyday life of this poor woman? Well, her daily chores, did I spell chores right? I'm sorry. Includes gathering wood for fire. That is part of her daily chores. She has to get up. They didn't have ovens like we have in our kitchens. They didn't have microwaves. She has to go gather wood. Okay. Verses 12 says, "As Yuhei Bahe your Elohim lives," she replied, "I have nothing baked, nothing for a handful, but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug." So, making bread from a mixture of flour and oil baked over a fire. She stores this in a clay jar or a jug with the oil. So we've seen her routine. She lives in a compound building with a wall, and she goes outside of the wall to pick up sticks. They would all share maybe one oven. She needs the sticks to make a fire. And then we also get data about the houses Give me the boy, he said to her, and take him from her arms. He carried him to the upper chamber where he was staying and laid him down on his own bed. What you're looking at is how their rooms will be structured. Usually 4 rooms. And to get to the top, you needed a ladder. All these accidental information matches the archaeological evidence we have on daily living in ancient Israel, even the house. So the Bible can provide us with real and detailed information about ancient Israelites, their surrounding neighbors. But that information is rarely the main point of the story. We have all these details, but they're not the main point of the story. When one eavesdrops, one has to understand what the text is saying, like Madam Alita said, like a commercial. But then in giving the commercial, real historical archaeological data is used to tell the narrative. The story we just read was about a prophet who works miracles. But when attention is paid to who he encounters and what they are doing, we get a wonderful snapshot on a day in the life of a poor widow in a small town. We're going to use this method to look at that song that we heard this morning, By the Rivers of Babylon. What is that psalm saying? What can we draw out of that psalm? What data are we given that is accidental? And that will open us to the shaping of this our Torah. Awesome.